Would you like to hear the most up-to-date research on consumer media habits, from social media to podcasting to how people consume media and more? And most importantly, what this means for content creators. This week it's all about the Infinite Dial 2021.
Welcome to the Content 10X Podcast, the show where content creators learn how to harness the power of content repurposing. And now, your host, Amy Woods.
Hello and welcome to the Content 10X Podcast. I'm your host, Amy Woods, and this week is a solo episode where I share the key findings and my observations in relation to the Infinite Dial 2021 report. But firstly, I wanted to mention to you that you may have noticed if you're a regular listener to the show, and thank you if you are. In fact, thank you for listening today, whether you're a first-time listener or you join me every week. I really do appreciate you. But you may have noticed, if you have a keen eye for detail, that we have 4 different episode types on the Content 10X podcast that rotate each week. We have our It Started With Content case study episodes, where I share inspiring and interesting stories of amazing things that have happened when someone embraced content. So stories where content went on to become so much more than the creator ever imagined, and they are both video and podcast episodes. And then we have what I tend to call my thought leadership videos and podcast episodes, where I share my point of view each episode on an area related to content marketing and repurposing, and especially about using content to grow a business. So short, kind of talking head style videos that are also podcast episodes that are supposed to be really value packed for you. And then I have my guest interviews. It's not always me talking, you'll be glad to hear. Sometimes I bring on a guest, and I always aim to invite really awesome guests on the show for conversations about maximizing content. And finally, the 4th episode type is this. It's an audio only episode that are really supposed to be super focused on a practical tip or advice, or timely as well. So last one was on Clubhouse, and today it's on the Infinite Dial report. So I hope you like this format in terms of mixing the episodes up into 4 different types and rotating through. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear whether you think this is a good idea or what kind of episode you love the most. So do let me know. I always welcome feedback. Email amy@content10x.com to let me know what you think. Okay, so on to this week's topic. As I mentioned, it's all about the key findings and observations from the Infinite Dial 2021. Now, this is an annual report from Edison Research and Triton Digital. If you haven't heard of the Infinite Dial, it's a really influential report that dates back over 2 decades, and it provides really the most up-to-date research on consumer media habits. It looks at digital audio, podcast consumption, mobile, smart speaker, and social media usage in the US. It's the longest running study of its kind, and the study for 2021, it was based on 1,507 US adults, and they define an adult as somebody aged over 12. So you could say, it's based on a pretty progressive audience, and I just find it really useful to take in what the Edison Research report shows us every year and see if there's anything that we can learn as content creators. So it's been a really interesting year, of course. Media consumption habits have changed by the huge change that we all found ourselves in, the pandemic and the lockdowns and everything that's come with it. I'm sure you, like me, probably changed your habits and just how we go about our daily life due to everything that's happened over the past year. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that has impacted the research. So let's look at social media, podcasting, and also how people consume content. Now, firstly, social media. 82% of people use social media. That's up from 80%, and that's estimated to be 233 million people. Now, this number has been fairly level for 3 years or so now. No big changes, which I don't think is really that surprising given that social media has been around for so long and usage levels are really high. But the report looks at brand awareness as well, and it also looks at usage. So sticking just with awareness at the moment, Facebook is still the leader of the pack, but Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Snapchat and TikTok are all up there. They all have plus 85% awareness. What's really interesting is TikTok's race to be up with the big players. Last year it was at 64% and this year it's at 86%. And that's just awareness as well. I think usage is maybe more interesting, and Facebook is leading by far, 61%, but it's gone down from 63 to 61. The biggest decline for Facebook is the age 12 to 34 category, and it's gone up for the age 55 and above. So the younger people are going and the older people are staying, which I don't think will really surprise anyone. It kind of reminds me of the pubs that were really popular with young people, and then gradually older people start turning up at the pub and suddenly the young people flock away. Facebook seems a little bit like that. It seems like it was the cool bar, but now it's becoming a little bit of a place for the older people to hang out. But of course, that's not across the board. There are so many people on Facebook and so many people using Facebook of lots of different ages. But the trend that Edison Research shows is younger people are starting to decline and the older people are still there and increasing. Instagram usage has risen in 3 years from 39% to 41% to 43%, so it's growing in all age categories as well. And no surprise, TikTok is also growing rapidly from 11 to 23%, and with the age group 12 to 34 going from 25 to 44%. Now, even with the age 55 plus on TikTok, that has increased from 2 to 6%, and the 35 to 55 year old going up from 5 to 16%. So they are not insignificant numbers at all. People in those age categories across the board, it's going up. But even in the older categories, we all expect TikTok to rise with the younger people. We know it's a mainly younger person platform, but the older age categories are still increasing on TikTok, and quite significantly as well, actually. Now, Snapchat is down. That was 31 to 28% from last year to this year. But could that be due to the rise of TikTok perhaps, and people going from Snapchat to TikTok? Perhaps that's the case. And funnily enough, the research shows that Twitter has grown year on year, even though that's been around for a while, one of the original social media platforms, but that has grown. That went from 19% 3 years ago to 21% to now 23%. And it's grown in a younger age category as well, so ages 12 to 34, that has increased from 29 to 34%. So that's interesting to see that Twitter is on the up. Perhaps that is because it's a place where people go to for up-to-date news and, real-time information on things that are going on in the world. And, this past year has certainly been a year for lots of things going on in the news, with the pandemic and the US election and some big social movements as well. So there's been a lot of news in the last year, and perhaps that's why, we're seeing Twitter rising up and also taking the interest of the younger age categories as well. LinkedIn has stayed just the same at 22% overall usage of LinkedIn, but the age category 12 to 34, that's steadily growing on LinkedIn. That went from 21%, 22 to 23 this year. Now, I still think LinkedIn, it's a very B2B platform, and we have to remember this study was done on 1,504 people in the US who are aged over 12, therefore classified as an adult. It may not have been a particularly B2B type conversation with the individuals in the study, so it doesn't surprise me that LinkedIn isn't really high up there. But at the same time, there's still a lot of people who are on LinkedIn, and it's great to see that it's increasing in that age 12 to 34 category as well. Now, the most often used social media platforms I think is really, really interesting. For the younger age category under 34, it's really spread out quite evenly actually. The most popular usage is Instagram at 33%, but then Facebook's 21%, Snapchat's 15%, TikTok 16%, Twitter 5%, and just a tiny interest there actually in Pinterest. The biggest jumps are in Instagram and TikTok for that age category. And then for the most often used for the age 35 to 55 category, it's mainly Facebook. So 60% Facebook. And this group also, they're a lot more keener on Pinterest than the younger people. Instagram is very much a feature in this category, as is TikTok. And then the 55 plus, that is again mainly Facebook, even more so at 70%. And then Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest are all evens at 4% each. So I guess really to summarise, everything points to Facebook being the place where a lot of people are. But it's not all about Facebook. We can't ignore the big jump in TikTok. So that is not just popular amongst the kids and the younger people. It's clearly just showing an interest level across all the age categories. So I'm not saying everyone jump on TikTok. It depends where your audience are, but it's certainly not one to be completely disregarded. And also Twitter, not one to be ignored. It all depends on your business and your audience, but it's great to see that Twitter is doing well and increasing. And I guess a key thing that I take away from this is to think about what your social media strategy is. And I don't think you should have a catch-all social media strategy. I think you need a strategy for each platform. You need a Facebook strategy, a Twitter strategy, a TikTok strategy, and so on, to really be intentional with what you are doing and who you are speaking to on each platform. And I'll say it again, I'm not saying that it should be everywhere or that you need a strategy for every platform. It depends on your business and where your audience are, but really do think about having separate strategies and not just one single social media strategy. Hey, just a little break from this week's episode to let you know about becoming a Content 10x Insider. If you want more content repurposing tips and advice, then why not join hundreds of business owners, marketers and content creators who get them delivered straight to their inbox once a week by subscribing to the Content 10x newsletter. As well as tips and advice, you get industry updates, inspiring stories, exclusive content, offers and more. You can subscribe at content10x.com/newsletter, and there's a link in the show notes too. Okay, back to this week's episode. Okay, so now let's look at podcasting. This is an area that I really love on this report. Obviously, having a podcast myself and working with podcasters, it's just really interesting to hear how things change year on year. Now, there was a dip when the pandemic hit when it comes to podcast listening. There's no surprise there, I guess. All our habits changed. But over time, though, as the year went on, listening came back again. And the Infinite Dial reports significant gains in podcast listening for 2021, which is fantastic given the year. And I think actually quite surprising. Even if it had remained flat, I probably would have been surprised. So the fact that it has gone up is really good going, because most people, certainly me included, have restructured our days and our lives in ways that we could never have imagined over the past year. And podcasting still seems to have found a way in, even with all of this disruption. So for me, listening to podcasts was something that I always did when driving, when I'd be driving to go and work from somewhere or driving to the gym. All of those things, of course, have stopped. And also going to the gym has stopped as well. That's another place that I would have listened to podcasts. So the habits that I had that caused me to listen to podcasts stopped. But funnily enough, I established new habits. I started going on bike rides and walks and runs, and that got me listening again. And I'm sure many people are exactly the same. There was a stop, a bit of a dip, a bit of a shock as things changed in our lives, but then somehow we found our way back to our podcasts. So what does the research tell us? So firstly, 62%, so an estimated 176 million of US adults listen to online audio weekly, which averages 16 hours and 14 minutes. That's not just podcasts, online audio. We're talking also about things like online radio and audiobooks as well. Audio brands that are used most often spread across Spotify, which is number one, but also Pandora, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Google Play, YouTube Music, iHeartRadio, loads of different places, loads of different audio brands. Like I said, Spotify is number one. So what this tells me, podcasters, you must be on all the apps. It's easy and it's free to get on all of the apps, or in most cases, all the big ones that I just mentioned anyway. So do make sure, you've got to be on Spotify, you've got to be on Apple Music, you've got to be on Amazon Music, get onto Google Play, iHeartRadio, because people do like to listen in loads of different places. Now, the podcast podcast statistics are really interesting. Now, 78% of people said that they were familiar with podcasting, which is estimated 222 million people. 57% said that they have ever listened to a podcast. So, way more than half of the population now say that they have once listened to a podcast, which is huge. And then better still, 41% said they'd listened in the last month, and 28% said they'd listened in the last week, so they listen weekly. That's up from 24%, which is fantastic. Another interesting figure, so 8 podcast episodes a week is on average what people said they listen to out of those weekly listeners, which averages as 5.1 shows a week. So people are listening to 8 episodes a week, but that's coming from 5 different shows. This is really interesting. If people have 5 shows a week that they are enjoying listening to, then how can you make sure that your podcast is one of those precious 5? So no pressure, but there are about 2 million podcasts and people listen to on average of 5 at any one time. So what can you do? So of course, marketing, making sure that people are aware of your podcast. It's never been more important than now. There are lots of podcasts and you're competing to get in that precious 5 to have those weekly listeners. And, podcasting is on the up. There's more people listening to podcasts, which is fantastic. There's more diverse audience listening to podcasts too, but you still need to be marketing your show. So that's really, really important. I'd also say that it's really important to differentiate yourself as well. So your podcast needs to be something different and also something really specific as well. I don't think nowadays if you start a podcast and it's just a very general podcast having general conversations, or it's on a well-trodden topic that there's so many other podcasts that are very similar, that's going to be difficult. You need to really differentiate yourself and you need to have a really specific podcast topic as well. And then you want to stay there. You don't just want to be listened to once. You want to be in that weekly top 5, and that's all about quality. So do focus on delivering really good quality content as well. So that's what I took away from that, the 8 episodes a week over 5 shows. We must market, we must differentiate ourselves, and we must focus on quality as well. And then of course, and you won't be surprised hearing this from me, repurpose too. So get your content out there in more than just a podcast format. That will help for your marketing. So repurposing your podcast to, social media content, because that's most likely the place that people will first hear about you. Also repurposing into written content to help you with, SEO and just the people who love to read, repurposing to video and so on. So this is also just about maximizing the return on investment from the time and effort that you put into your content and making it go further. So other interesting statistics from the study, more men and women are listening. So across both male and female, the numbers went up from listener perspective. The biggest growth age group was age 12 to 34, so that went up to 56%. Ethnicity is also not as dominated by white people anymore, 68 to 57%, and we saw more African American, Hispanic and Asian, and just a more diverse range of people listening to podcasts as well. So brilliant news, more listeners and more diverse audience. And now just one other part of the study that I think is really, really interesting, and it's looking at how people consume content. Now, 88% of the US population, 250 million people estimated, have a smartphone. That's risen after being flat for a few years. And tablets, they are on the decline, but still 51% of people have tablets. So it's still a lot, 145 million people. But I think tablets are on the decline because smartphones have become so advanced. People are just skipping the tablet. They have a phone and a computer, so they don't need the tablet in the middle because the phone is so advanced. And then 18%, so estimated 51 million US adults have internet-enabled watches. But that's been flat for 3 years now. Hasn't gone up, hasn't gone down. Now, quite a big jump is the smart speaker ownership. 33% of people own one. That's almost doubled in 3 years. And it is mainly Alexa devices and Google Home devices. So this is all really interesting. Smartphones on the up. smart speakers on the up, tablets seem to be on the decline, and the internet-enabled watches just seems to have flattened out. And I would just say that it's really interesting to think of how many people now are using their smartphones. And this is the place where I think most people will actually discover you. Please go ahead and check out my podcast episode, which is episode 134, called The Content Repurposing Customer Journey from Mobile to Long Form to Buying, because you'll be able to see how you can take people on a journey from their smartphone to longer form content to becoming a customer. I hope that you found it super useful. I think as content creators, where we're creating content to grow our business, it's super important to stay up to date with consumer data and insights. So I'm just really grateful every year to have a look at the infinite dial, and hopefully maybe I've saved you from having a look because you've listened to this episode instead. But the link to the report will be in the show notes for this episode. So go and have a look at the report, and they also do a webinar as well that you could have a look at. I'll provide the link to everything in the show notes. So thank you so much for listening to this week's podcast episode. I really do appreciate it. If you would like help with your content repurposing, then we offer a fully done for you end-to-end content repurposing service for businesses that create video or podcast content. So if you want to find out more about that, head to content10x.com. And if you want to get a copy of my book, so if you prefer the DIY approach, then don't hesitate. It's called Content 10x. You will find it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and many places online, but just head to content10x.com/book and you'll be able to grab a copy of my book. Please do go ahead and follow me on social media as well. I'm at Content 10x on all of the social media platforms. And all that's left to say is thank you so much for listening to this week's episode, and I will catch you in the next one.